Merritt, 34 years old. I once believed that if I was kind enough, quiet enough, and patient enough, they would eventually see me as part of the family. But then they sent out the seating chart for the family photo. My name wasn't on it. Just a handwritten note. Still need Etta to show up, there's an awkward gap. No one said I mattered. Only that my absence made the picture look uneven. And I understood some roles aren't forgotten. They're simply replaced to better fit the frame. I stepped out of that frame, and no one needed to turn the camera back. I've learned that absence doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it settles like dust fine and undisturbed until light finds it. Heather's text came while I was still holding a red pen over a paper that didn't deserve the grade I'd written. You're not going back for the anniversary. Your mother-in-law said everyone's already there. The ink bled slightly at the edge of the B-. I stared at the message a while before unlocking my phone. There was no invitation in my inbox. No forwarded itinerary. Not even the usual vague let us know if you're coming from Colleen. I opened the Callahan family thread, half expecting to find myself tagged in a flurry of planning. Instead, I scrolled through a week of messages, flower arrangements, color palettes, dress codes, valet, parking confirmation. Make sure Uncle Mike has his seat. Did we confirm the quartet? Sloane says she'll bring the champagne flutes. There were names, lots of them. Mine wasn't one of them. I checked again as if maybe I'd changed how my name appeared overnight. Drew had flown down early to help with setup. I typed deleted, then retyped. Was I supposed to come down for the anniversary thing? The response came 5 minutes later. Mom thought you were busy, and maybe it's better not to complicate things. I don't know what I expected. Maybe an apology. Maybe a second message saying he was just joking. I looked around the classroom desks in crooked rows, my scarf still draped over the back of my chair, a cold cup of tea untouched since third period. None of it helped. I reread the message. Busy. Don't complicate things. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I didn't reply. That evening, I stood in the laundry room folding towels. One of them still had a frayed corner where Drew had once caught it in the dryer hinge. I'd mended it then, not because it mattered, but because I wanted to keep the things that had been touched. Now it just looked like another thing left too long in the same place. At dinner, I didn't ask how the flight was, or if the catering had arrived. He didn't offer anything. When the doorbell rang, it was the mail carrier dropping off a large envelope inside a commemorative booklet celebrating Walter and Margaret Callahan's 40 years of family love and legacy. On the back cover, a list of names in italic gold. I turned the page slowly. There were old photographs, Margaret in a garden hat, Walter building a treehouse with the Drew and Sloane. There were tributes printed in cursive from extended relatives, a poem from Sloane, a scanned napkin with doodles from a grandchild. There was a 2-page spread of marriages in the family. I looked for my face. I looked again. The photo from our wedding wasn't included. The one where my veil caught sunlight just right. The one Mom took before she died. There was a paragraph under Drew's name. Drew married in 2016. That was it. No name, no story, not even a line break. A phone vibrated on the counter. Mine. Margaret's name lit up the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. When I listened to the voicemail, her voice was calm, like someone confirming an order. I know this must feel a bit awkward, dear, but it's really a tight guest list this year. Just immediate family. You understand? I stared at the wall until it blurred. The anniversary wasn't a public event. It was in their home, their table, their garden, They just decided I wasn't family anymore. I walked to the bedroom and opened the top drawer of my nightstand. The ring box was still there, tucked beneath a silk handkerchief. I hadn't opened it in months. Inside the band sat quietly the engraving worn faint from years of hands held too tightly and let go too loosely. It didn't look like it belonged to anything anymore. I placed it back without closing the box. The next morning the sun came in early. I made toast and oversteeped the tea. My phone buzzed again. Heather again. Thought I saw your name in the RSVP. Was that an error, or are you flying in late? I didn't answer. At school, I erased the whiteboard more slowly than usual. One of the students had written "Love equal trust" in the corner. I left it. At the grocery store, I passed the floral display twice before picking up a small pot of rosemary. Not to cook with, just because it smelled like something sharp and rooted. At home, I sat by the window and placed the pot on the sill. I didn't have words for what I felt. Just a shape. No storm, no explosion, no dramatic scene. Just the quiet subtraction of a name from a list and the long pause afterward. I didn't call Drew. I didn't call Margaret back. I didn't mention the booklet to anyone. I folded the towel with the torn edge again. And this time, I didn't fix it. I used to think if I made myself small enough, I might finally fit. The first year I sent Margaret a message in October asking if she'd like me to bring anything special for Thanksgiving. She replied with a list 2 pies, her preferred brand of whipped cream, and paper napkins that matched the table runner. At the dinner, the pies were untouched. Sloane had brought bakery tarts with gold foil leaves. Margaret pointed to them and said, "Some things are just better when you leave them to professionals." I smiled and stacked the used plates afterward, wiping crumbs off the tablecloth no one had complimented. At Christmas, I wrapped each gift with ribbon and wax seal. I printed name tags in script, tied them with twine. The gifts were left under the tree for hours, then moved to the guest room unopened. Drew found me later folding discarded wrapping paper. "They'll get to it eventually," he said, and nudged my shoulder like we were watching a sports game, not the slow evaporation of welcome. Sloane's birthday video had taken me 4 nights. I scanned childhood photos, overlaid them with piano music, even added the blooper clips from her graduation. I sent it to the family thread with a simple note. "Hope this brings some good memories." The thread continued without pause. Someone posted a meme about wine. Someone else asked if Walter's blood pressure had stabilized. The video remained there unread. When I checked the view count later that week, it still said 1. When Sloane's wedding planning began, Margaret changed the theme color 2 days before the engagement dinner. All the linens had been ordered in navy. Now she wanted sage green. I spent my lunch break at school calling vendors. The evening at home was spent steaming the new napkins. At the dinner, she looked at the table and said, "Much better." I don't know why we considered that other color. It drained the whole room. Sloane chimed in, lifting her glass. "Glad we caught it in time." I nodded, my fingers still red from the iron. There was a photo session the summer Drew's uncle turned 70, the whole family lined up on the back lawn in coordinated pastels. Margaret tapped my arm just before the photographer clicked the shutter. "Let's have you on the edge, dear. Just in case we need to crop for the church newsletter." She smiled like it was a compliment. The print hung in their hallway for over a year. My face didn't make it. At first I laughed. Quietly. To myself. I told Drew it must have been an accident. He shrugged and said, "It's not that deep. You know how Mom is with formatting." I bought matching aprons one Easter, embroidered each with a name. I handed them out during brunch prep. Sloane flipped hers inside out. Margaret left hers folded. Walter said, "Well, you've certainly kept busy." I began showing up early and staying late, setting tables, taking coats, slicing fruit, rearranging centerpieces when Margaret's expression soured. I wore soft colors, avoided bold lipstick, agreed when I didn't, laughed when I wasn't sure why. Once in the middle of a bridal shower, Sloane turned to me and said, "You're good at blending in. Like wallpaper. We always know you're around somewhere." Margaret laughed. "That's a gift in its own way." I looked down at my hands still wet from washing the champagne flutes. During one of those long afternoons where people hovered around punch bowls and tiered desserts, Walter approached me in the sunroom. He motioned toward the garden and said, "You've made Drew calmer." That's something. I wasn't sure what to say, so I nodded. That summer I pressed wildflowers into a handmade card and left it on Margaret's porch with a book I thought she'd like. A novel set in Maine, where she once mentioned a childhood vacation. She returned the book at Thanksgiving spine uncreased. Fiction's never been my thing. The card was never mentioned. After a while I stopped asking what I could bring. I just arrived with something neutral. Bread olives, things that wouldn't clash with a theme or memory. At 4th of July, I brought lemonade in a vintage glass bottle. Sloane raised an eyebrow and said I thought we outgrew props. I poured it quietly into the plastic pitcher beside the red cups. Even Drew started to sound distant when I brought these things up. "They mean well," he once said, turning off the bedside lamp. "You just interpret everything too personally." I watched the light disappear into the wall. Nothing had been personal. That was the point. I began noticing how my name faded from emails, how invitations were addressed to the Callans with no mention of mine. At one dinner, I overheard Margaret speaking with a distant cousin. "We've kept it tight, just family, and those who really feel like family." She saw me behind the doorway, didn't flinch. I waited until the plates were cleared to leave. In a box beneath our bed, I kept the small things I never gave them. A tea towel with Margaret's initials, a gift card for Sloane's favorite bakery, a photo frame I'd bought for Walter after a golf tournament, still wrapped in cellophane. Sometimes I took them out just to remember that I had tried, not loudly, not perfectly, but sincerely. No one ever asked me to stop, they just kept not noticing. And eventually I learned how to disappear the way they preferred by doing it quietly. There's a difference between being left out and being removed. One is accidental, the other is deliberate. For Margaret's 60th, someone had the idea to collect handwritten notes from each guest, memories, wishes, whatever came to mind. They called it the legacy box. I bought linen paper from the craft store, pressed violets between the folds. I wrote in blue ink, careful cursive, the kind they don't teach anymore. I started with, "Thank you for teaching me where silence lives in a room, and how to walk quietly through it." The box was opened at the end of the party ribbon, undone in front of cake crumbs and half-drunk champagne. Drew had his arm around me. I remember that part because it was rare. One by one, people read their notes aloud. Some were sweet, some forgettable. Walter's had a joke about grey hair. Sloane's was printed on cardstock with a calligraphy font and signed with a wax seal. Everyone clapped. Then there was a pause. Margaret lifted a card with no name on the envelope. She opened it, skimmed it for a moment, then held it up between two fingers like it had been handled too many times. "This one's unsigned," she said, turning to her friend Anne beside her. "Must be from catering." She placed it face down on the table. No one asked to hear it. That night I took off my shoes by the back door. There was a small scrape on my ankle where one of the chair legs had caught me. I ran my fingers over it, not to soothe the sting, just to make sure it was real. Months later, at a casual dinner, Drew mentioned I'd been given a teaching award. It wasn't a big thing, just something the students voted on, but he sounded proud when he said it. I looked down at my lap, unsure what to do with the attention. Margaret folded her napkin. "That reminds me," she said, glancing toward Sloane. "Remember when you got that science fair ribbon in 7th grade? You were always sharp. It's in the blood." Sloane didn't look up. She was scrolling through her phone. Margaret added, "Good teaching must run in the family." I refilled my water. At home, I found the certificate in the drawer where we kept batteries and extra charger cords. I hadn't meant to put it there. I just hadn't known where else it belonged. When my essay was published in the Regional Literary Review, I printed 3 copies. One for myself, one for the school office, and one I left on the console table during a family brunch. I placed it beside the stack of magazines Margaret kept, fanned out like props. No one moved it. Later that week, I shared the digital link in the family thread. Just a simple note. This was a piece I wrote about teaching and memory. Thought I'd share. There were no likes, no replies, not even the polite double heart Margaret used when someone posted a baby photo. 7 days passed. Then Sloane posted an article, 5 continent strategies that get you noticed. Her caption read, "Here's how I stay sharp and relevant, no fluff." There were comments from every branch of the family tree. "So proud, you always were the clever one. Love, this sharing with my team." I clicked the link. The tips were short and obvious. Write in lists, use bold fonts, keep it under 3 minutes. I closed my laptop and stared at the stain on the dining chair coffee from a morning when I'd spilled my cup trying to answer 2 calls at once. One from a parent. One from Drew. Neither had needed anything urgent. But I'd picked up both. That's how I'd been living, ready, reachable, replaceable. There was a family photo hung in the hallway at Margaret's house. I remember the shoot. It had rained the night before, and the grass was soft underfoot. I stood on the edge of the group, holding the hand of a child that wasn't mine, but had wandered near. The final print cropped out my arm. It wasn't malice, it was layout. Colleen once told me over sangria and paper lanterns, "You're just not the type people write stories about." She didn't mean it cruelly. She was trying to explain why I shouldn't expect more from them. She called it realism. I thought of that sentence when I watched Margaret tear the seal off each envelope that night, looking for familiar handwriting skipping over mine like it had never existed. I thought of it again when Drew said nothing after the award dinner, just put his keys in the dish and turned on the news, and again when I saw my words sit unread beside Sloane's bullet points. I didn't stop writing. I just stopped printing extra copies. Some names are never spoken, not because they've been forgotten, but because remembering them might require acknowledgement. Mine was easier to ignore. Some boundaries aren't crossed all at once. They erode quietly until one morning something sacred is missing, and no one remembers how it happened. I was rearranging the linen drawer in the hallway cabinet. The seams of the cloth napkins had begun to fray, uneven from too many rushed cycles through the washer. One of them still carried a faint stain, cranberry or pomegranate no longer certain. I folded it anyway, smoothed the edge, and reached for the next. The phone buzzed on the counter. I let it ring once. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was. Sloane's voice came through thin, sugar-cracked. "It's such a mess," she breathed into the receiver. "I found a dress last week. It was perfect, but Mom says we need to cut back. We have to keep the country club and the band. James won't budge on the wine list, and I've already paid deposits for the calligrapher and the chairs, so the dress is the only place we can cut. There was a pause long enough for her to inhale then. And then, I thought, yours. The one from your wedding. You're not using it. And I just remember how beautiful it was. That lace, the way it caught the light. I always thought it was too old-fashioned for me, but now I realize it's timeless. Classic. I sat down on the ottoman near the cabinet and looked at the blue thread on my pajama sleeve. One of the cuffs had come undone months ago. I'd never gotten around to fixing it. The threads curled like questions. You're the only person I know with something like that. And I know it was your mom's last project, but don't you think she'd love to see it on someone else again? To know it's still part of a new beginning. She didn't wait for an answer before adding, "Please!" It was the kind of plea that doesn't really ask, it presumes. I said I needed time to think. That evening I opened the wardrobe in the guest room. The preservation box was tucked behind a stack of outdated tax documents and a winter coat I hadn't worn since we'd moved into this house. It had my name printed in embossed lettering on the lid, though the gold had faded slightly from exposure. I lifted it carefully and brought it to the bed. The tape had dried along the edges, giving easily under my fingers. Inside, the gown still rested like a breath held too long. The pearl beading on the bodice shimmered just enough to suggest movement, even in stillness. I touched the fabric where the sleeve met the neckline, felt the tiny catch of thread where my mother's needle had faltered. She hadn't noticed it at the time. I never pointed it out. Underneath the lace along the inner lining, I found it the stitch she told me about only once during a fitting when she was already too tired to stand. A soft loop hidden in the hem, shaped like a sideways 8. "It won't show," she whispered, pressing a thimble into my palm. "But you'll know. It means you're not alone. Even when you are." The next morning, Drew poured coffee into a chipped mug and gestured toward my silence. "You thinking about it?" I nodded. "She's overwhelmed," he said, stirring too much cream into his cup. "It's not like you'll wear it again. It's one day." He placed the spoon on the counter. A ring of beige liquid bled slowly outward. "I didn't wipe it up. She said Mom would want her to have it." I looked at him then. He didn't flinch. That afternoon I texted Sloane. "You can borrow it. I'll have it packed for pickup next week." She sent back 4 heart emojis and a string of exclamation points. I didn't reply. The following day, a photo appeared in the family group chat. Sloane in a boutique mirror, holding the dress up to her chest, her phone angled just right to catch the full length of the gown in her arms, even though the bottom still trailed inside its box. Her caption read, "Finally found my dream dress." No mention of me, no mention of my mother, no word like borrowed, just hers. Walter commented, "It's perfect on you, Margaret. That gown always needed the right bride. I knew you'd do it justice." I stared at the screen until the light dimmed. Later that night, Drew cleared the dinner plates and mentioned how relieved he was that things were smoothing out. She was really touched. She told Mom it meant a lot to feel included. That's what families do, share things. I didn't answer. I walked into the office, opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside were remnants buttons from my mother's sewing box, a fabric sample from the veil, a spool of silver thread she'd never gotten to use. I ran one of the buttons between my fingers. It was mother of pearl, slightly uneven. That weekend, Sloane messaged me asking for the contact information of the seamstress who'd preserved the dress. She wanted minor adjustments made, nothing big. Just enough to make it fit her shape. I gave her the number. Then I drove to Edna Whitlow's tailoring shop without calling. Silence isn't always the absence of noise. Sometimes it's the presence of decision. I started with the nightgown, the one my mother gave me on the morning of my wedding, soft pearl silk with a faded tag and a loose thread near the collar. She never said why she chose that particular one, only that it was comfortable but dignified. I had worn it once, maybe twice, and then tucked it away beneath heavier fabrics. It had the kind of gentleness that didn't belong to performance. I laid it flat, smoothing the wrinkles with my palm, then folded it into thirds and placed it inside the cedar box at the foot of the bed. Beside it, I added the cloth-bound notebook where I used to keep snippets of vows and dreams for a house we never quite filled. A dried leaf slipped from between the pages. I left it there. The wedding photo came down next. Not torn, not broken, just unhooked from the wall like something that had been misframed. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I wrapped the frame in the same tissue paper I'd once used for holiday gifts, the kind with gold flecks that always stuck to your fingertips. There was a knock at the bedroom door. Drew leaned his head in. "You've been quiet." I nodded. He stepped further into the room, his socks making no sound against the carpet. "Is this about Sloane? Or the dress?" My hands were already inside the drawer, closing over the invitation to her wedding. Cream envelope, heavy cardstock, a wax seal with an embossed S, my name written in gold curling script. I folded the card in half, not to ruin it, just to take away its symmetry, and slipped it into the back of the drawer. "She didn't mean anything by it," he continued. "You know how she is." I closed the drawer slowly. "You're not saying anything." I looked at him. He shifted his weight, glanced at the empty wall where the wedding photo had hung. "Are we okay?" "Just quiet," I said. "I think I need quiet." He didn't follow me when I left the room. That afternoon I signed out of the group thread, not with a message, not with a farewell. I just tapped a button and let it go. No banners, no confetti, just the dull confirmation that I wouldn't be notified again. The dining room cabinet still held the silver serving tray Margaret had given us as a wedding gift. It had never been used, not because it wasn't lovely, but because it felt like something meant to impress someone who wasn't me. I polished it one last time with a dry cloth and set it back inside, upside down. Later that evening, I removed the pewter keychain Drew had given me when we moved in. It had our initials engraved back when that kind of thing still felt permanent. I didn't throw it out. I just placed it in the small porcelain dish by the sink beside the ring I'd stopped wearing 2 weeks earlier. I hadn't told anyone about the ring, not because it was a secret, but because there was no story behind it. I had simply stopped. One morning, while rinsing my hands, I'd slid it off and let it rest against the porcelain. It was still there. Margaret sent a message 2 days later. "Hope you've had time to rest. We're finalizing seating. Let me know if you plan to be in the photos." I read it once and closed the screen. She didn't ask if I was coming, just whether I'd stand in the frame. I didn't respond. There was nothing dramatic about it. No thunderclap of confrontation, just the quiet arrangement of objects that no longer belonged in sight. An old receipt from the dress preservation service. A handwritten note from Sloane, back when she still signed things with hearts. A place card with my name spelled incorrectly, the ink slightly smeared from condensation. I kept them all, but I no longer felt required to explain them. Colleen left a voicemail. Her tone was measured, like she'd rehearsed it once before pressing call. Just checking in. Heard there's been distance. You know how families are. Maybe don't take things so literally. Sloane's under a lot of pressure and Margaret's always had strong opinions. You're practical. That's your strength. I deleted the message. Drew came home late that night. He placed a paper bag on the counter and called it dinner. I thanked him and poured the soup into a ceramic bowl without a word. We ate in the quiet. He checked his phone twice. I didn't look at mine. As he rinsed his dishes, he spoke without turning around. They'll get over it. The faucet hummed. I folded the napkin across my lap into a perfect square. I think they expect you to show up, he added, even if you're upset. That's what you do, right? I stood, carried my bowl to the sink, and set it down beside his. In the morning, I packed the last box. Not to leave the house, just to clear space. It held cards, photographs, programs from events where I had been a name on the back page. The cedar box closed easily. Nothing inside fought for space. I returned the framed picture of my mother to the shelf near the doorway. She was wearing her navy wool coat, hands tucked inside the sleeves, head slightly tilted the way she always did when listening more than speaking. That afternoon, Drew leaned against the doorway while I folded laundry. Do you want to talk? I already did, I said. He looked confused. With the things I kept, and the things I didn't. He didn't reply. I returned to the sweater I was folding. It smelled faintly of lavender, the kind she used to keep in her drawers. The sleeves were stretched, the hem a little uneven. I folded it slowly, smoothing each corner. Some exits don't happen in hallways or door frames. They begin in the smallest drawers in boxes that close without effort. And when it's time, the loudest thing left behind is what isn't said. Some rooms feel unfamiliar, even when the silence welcomes you. I woke to the weight of quiet, not heavy, just full, the kind that doesn't rush to be filled. The kettle took longer than I remembered. I ground the beans by hand, small circles at first, then slower. The scent drifted into the kitchen like it had somewhere else to be. When the water hissed into the ceramic mug, I didn't move. I stood still, watching the steam rise, letting it unravel the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The cabin didn't have curtains, just simple glass panes, old wooden frames with chipped paint, and the faint outline of past seasons etched into the corners. Outside, the plum tree leaned slightly, left branches bowed like someone trying not to speak too loudly. I counted 7 fruits still hanging. The rest had dropped or been taken. There was no signal strong enough to check messages. I didn't try more than once. The silence wasn't just outside now. It had settled in the soft space between my shoulders, and stayed. In the afternoon, I opened the last of the storage boxes. The tape had dulled the corners rounded from being moved too often without ever really being opened. Inside, wrapped in muslin and folded with more care than necessity, sat the sewing machine. It still smelled faintly of furniture polish and the lavender sachets my mother used to hide in drawers. The dial was worn smooth, the numbers barely visible. I ran my thumb across it slowly, as if turning it might wake something that had long been asleep. Beside it was the box of threads, spools of pale grey soft navy cream, a colour for everything no one noticed. The first few days passed without schedule. I didn't set alarms. The sun came through the east windows and touched the wall just above the stove, and that was enough. I ate toast with salt and olive oil, reused mugs, and swept the porch in the early evening without needing a reason. One night, I found the small box of student letters. I'd forgotten they were in the cedar chest. Folded sheets with uneven handwriting. Thanks for telling me I could write about my mom. No one else said it was okay. I didn't like reading poems before, but you made it feel like talking to a friend. I wrote this for you. It's not very good. They had signed their names in pencil, some with doodles, one with a pressed flower still tucked in the corner. A violet, faded but intact. I reread them slowly, one by one, letting each word find its own time. There had been a year when Margaret told me not to mention work so much at dinner. She'd looked at Drew across the table and said, "It's not like she's changing the world. She teaches essays, not heart surgery." I'd laughed then too quickly, but those students had written like something had changed. The sewing machine sat in the corner, silent, but not forgotten. I hadn't threaded it yet. Just knowing it was there felt like enough. The nights were cooler than I expected. I wore the old navy cardigan, the one with the missing button near the wrist. My mother used to say it made me look unbothered but competent. I hadn't understood it then. I still wasn't sure I did, but it warmed me just enough. One evening, I walked the edge of the property along the fence that separated my grandmother's plot from the neighbour's overgrown field. I found a small wooden sign half buried under leaves. The paint had peeled, but I could still make out the carved letters. If you're here, you belong. No name, no instruction, just that. I carried it back to the porch and leaned it against the bottom step. There were no emails asking for RSVP confirmations, no last-minute seating changes, no group threads filled with menu debates and colour schemes. No one called to ask why I wasn't at the bridal shower. No one texted about travel plans. There was nothing to say, so nothing was said. I checked the mail on the third day. A flyer for a yard sale, a local church bulletin, one envelope addressed by hand, no return address. Inside was a copy of a poem clipped from the town's free paper. One of mine. Someone had underlined 2 lines in blue pen. "You do not need to be invited to stand where the light lands." There was no note. I didn't need one. I pinned it to the small corkboard beside the door. Just below it, I thumbtacked a postcard I'd found in the back of the drawer. A photo of my grandmother as a girl, standing in front of this same cabin, holding a jar of plum preserves, wearing a serious expression and a lace apron. She hadn't looked like someone waiting to be asked in. I didn't need curtains here. The windows let in enough of the day and closed out just enough of the night. Some evenings I lit a candle not for any purpose, just to remember that I could. I stopped keeping track of when I had last spoken aloud, but I remember clearly the moment I thought, "No one calls me here." And still no one calls me wrong. Some invitations arrived too late to be called welcome. The email subject line read, "Family Photo Day. Final headcount request." No greeting, no warmth, just logistics. A spreadsheet was attached, color-coded, with names assigned to rows labeled Seating Tier 1, Standing Tier 2, and Children Front Row. I scrolled slowly. Drew Margaret Sloane. Even Uncle Kent, who hadn't attended anything in 5 years. My name wasn't there. Beneath the list in a different font, one line had been added by hand in scanned ink. "Still need Etta to show up. There's an awkward gap." I didn't open the spreadsheet again. 3 hours later, a message lit up on my phone. Margaret. First contact in 3 months. The preview read, "Mi biet kondang bun." I didn't tap it open immediately. I turned the phone face down on the table and let the room settle. The afternoon light had started its usual tilt toward gold. It caught the rim of the chipped cup on the windowsill, the one I'd repaired with a line of clear glue that still held. Only after the light left the rim did I read the rest. "Mi biet kondang bun, nhưng sẽ tốt nếu cả nhà trong du day. Mọi người đều hỏi con đâu." No mention of the dress, no question about where I was living, no how are you, just symmetry, just enough bodies to make the photo look whole. I didn't reply. That night, I went through the small drawer in the writing desk and found the photograph from my wedding. The original one. Not the framed version we used to display, but the matte copy my mother had printed for her own album. The corners had softened from age. In it, I was standing next to Drew under the arch of eucalyptus, laughing at something I no longer remember. Behind me, my mother's hand rested just slightly on the back of my dress. You could barely see it, but I knew it was there. She'd adjusted the lace so it wouldn't bunch. Her voice came back to me, not loud, just certain, if they only want you for the picture, they don't want you at all. Colleen sent a follow-up message the next morning. Hey, we're doing neutral tones for the big photo. Just wear something simple, timeless. And could you bring your own foundation? Sloane says the makeup artist doesn't have your shade. I stared at the word, your, the underline it created without meaning to. On the porch, the cushion of the wooden chair had faded into a pale grey from years of weather and use. I traced one finger over the stitching. The seams had held. There had been a time when I would have driven 4 hours for a brunch where no one spoke directly to me, when I would have arrived early just to arrange chairs, refill glasses, smooth over pauses. I remembered one Easter morning arriving with handmade place cards, each name calligraphed in ink I'd matched to the table runner. Margaret had squinted at them and said, "That's sweet, but I already printed some on the computer. Yours look a little rustic." She hadn't touched them again. The old sewing machine sat by the corner, still unthreaded. I hadn't needed it yet, but it was there, ready like a promise I hadn't decided how to keep. Later, Drew called. I let it ring. Then it rang again. On the 4th try, I picked up. "I told them you're thinking about it," he said flatly. I didn't respond. They just want the photo to feel complete. I looked out the window. The plum tree had dropped 2 more fruits. They were lying soft in the grass, untouched. "Look," he continued, "they're not trying to hurt you. It's just easier if everyone shows up." I placed the phone down on the windowsill, still on the line, and let him speak into the room. His voice kept coming. I heard the tone more than the words. When it stopped, I turned the phone off. That evening I lit a small candle and placed it beside the box of student letters. I didn't need the light. I just wanted the space to feel chosen. On the corkboard, the clipped poem still hung. You do not need to be invited to stand where the light lands. A breeze passed through the open window and stirred the edge of the photograph. My mother's hand, steady, just visible. Her dress had no ornament, no borrowed lace, just strength in the seams. I didn't wear neutral tones for her. I wore blue, her favorite. And I never needed retouching. The next morning, I folded the invitation list in half and placed it beneath the worn copy of The Color Purple I kept on the nightstand. I didn't shred it. I didn't send it back. Some refusals don't need punctuation. They only need absence. Some recoveries don't come with applause. They arrive like morning light through uneven curtains, noticeable only when you stop squinting. I didn't plan to teach again. I hadn't imagined the library's back room with its mismatched chairs and half-lit corners could become a place where women came to tell the truth. But I wrote my name on the sign-up sheet next to Creative Writing for Women Mondays at 10 a.m. with a borrowed pen that leaked blue ink onto my palm. No one asked for a resume. No one asked if I was still married. They just showed up with notebooks that smelled of handbags and grocery receipts, and sat down without expecting me to prove I belonged. Janice brought a binder held together with duct tape and hope. Her first page was titled, "The Day After He Left," but she never finished the sentence. "There was laundry," she wrote. "The dog didn't eat." I nodded once and passed her a pen that didn't smudge. Another woman, younger, maybe 20, maybe barely out of high school, wrote about applying to community college. Her essay began, "I want to write like I don't have to disappear into the background." She didn't say where that background had been, but I recognized it. The place where silence is expected and gratitude is presumed. Each Monday I sat with them. I didn't explain much. I just read what they gave me and circled words that trembled or stood too still. I came home after class and boiled lentils, slowly letting the scent fill the corners of the house. The clock in the kitchen ticked unevenly, but I no longer corrected it. I had begun to accept things that worked, without needing to be exact. One afternoon, I opened the cedar chest again, not for ceremony, not for memory, but because I needed to mend a button on my cardigan, and the sewing kit was inside. The wedding dress was folded carefully in its cotton wrap, no longer heavy to the touch. The sleeve had torn just slightly at the seam right at the elbow. I hadn't noticed it before. I threaded a needle with grey thread, not white, not hidden, just enough to mark that someone had chosen to repair what had been broken. The first stitch caught, the second held. By the fifth, I was no longer measuring. I was simply following the line where fabric had once come apart. I folded the dress again, but differently this time. I didn't tuck the corner as tightly. I let one edge peek out like a page waiting to be read again, but not urgently. Later that week, a woman from class asked me if I had ever published anything. I paused. Then I said, "Not for a while. I've been writing differently now." She smiled and replied, "Maybe that's better." At the post office, I ran into a retired teacher who used to substitute at my old school. He remembered my name, asked if I still lived out near Cedar Creek. "I moved further out," I said. "Quieter place." He looked down at this package I was mailing, addressed in my careful handwriting, and nodded. "Sometimes that's the best kind of move," he said. The envelope contained a scholarship recommendation letter for the girl from class, the one who wrote about vanishing in a group project. She hadn't asked for it. I just offered. When I got home, I muted the family text thread again. There had been a photo posted from Drew's cousin's baby shower. Someone had written, "We should have had Etta there for the centerpieces," followed by a heart emoji, and nothing else. No one tagged me. I didn't open the rest. I made tea from the chamomile growing wild along the fence. It was slightly bitter, but I drank it anyway. In class, Janice finally finished her story. He left a note, she read, but not one worth saving. So I swept the porch and pretended I had just moved in. Everyone applauded softly. She looked down, then up, and whispered, "I didn't think I'd be proud of a line like that." I told her, "It holds." That weekend I cleaned out the last drawer I hadn't touched. Inside was a pair of earrings I hadn't worn since the wedding. Small pearls, slightly yellowed. One had lost its backing. I placed them in a small cloth pouch and set them in the donation box. There was no need to keep things that didn't anchor me. I fixed the broken leg of the reading chair with wood glue and pressure. The chair didn't wobble anymore, but it creaked when I sat down. I didn't mind. A message came from Sloane's new sister-in-law. "Hey, Etta, we're putting together a keepsake book for Sloane's birthday. Could you write something? A memory or just a sweet note. Doesn't have to be long." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I opened a blank note and typed, "She taught me what absence feels like." I didn't send it. Instead, I powered off the phone and went outside. The plum tree was dropping fruit again. I picked one up and brushed off the dirt. The skin was soft but still intact. I took a bite. Not sweet, not sour, just ripe. I returned to my desk and reopened the box of student letters I had collected over the years. One in particular caught my attention. Dear Ms. Collins, thank you for helping me rewrite my college essay 3 times. I didn't get into Yale, but I got into somewhere better for me. I didn't know someone like you could believe in someone like me. I read it twice, then I placed it back. On the windowsill, the sun touched the grey thread of the wedding dress's repaired seam. The light didn't highlight the damage, it traced the mending. A soft gleam over what had been made whole, not perfectly, but truthfully. I looked at my hands. The lines in my palms had not changed, but the way I carried them had. I taught another class that week. The girl in the hoodie wrote something new. I don't want to be someone's apology. I want to be their afterthought that never left. She looked at me and asked, "Is that too much?" I shook my head. It's enough. And for the first time in months, I meant it, not as comfort, not as kindness, but as something closer to truth. When I returned home, the kettle had cooled. I reheated it. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted one more moment to sit, to wrap my hands around a cup that had never been broken. I sat on the porch until the steam disappeared, not waiting for anyone, just staying with myself. And that, too, was a way of returning. Some endings don't need ceremony, just a pen that doesn't tremble. The email arrived with no salutation, no softening phrase, only a subject line in all caps, sterile and clinical. Callahan family, land trust, final vote, and beneficiary confirmation. I didn't need to open the attachment. The tone had said enough. I printed the document anyway. My home printer coughed once before beginning. I waited through the dragging sound, each line etching itself like a slow decision being made permanent. The form was simple. My name was listed on page 2 under secondary beneficiaries, followed by a conditional clause. Those no longer residing in Charleston city limits may relinquish interest in parcel 14D to expedite zoning adjustments. Expedite. Not resolve, not consider, just clear the way. My signature was the last checkmark they needed to move forward. There was a line labelled Reason for Forfeiture. I left it blank. Instead, I pulled open the bottom drawer of my mother's desk and removed a folded piece of stationery tucked behind an old recipe for tomato pie. My mother's handwriting had faded, where her pen had paused too long, an indentation between thoughts. If the room forgets your name, don't shout. Just leave it quieter than you entered and take your name with you. I read it twice before tucking the letter behind the signed document. Then I folded both and slid them into a cream envelope, the kind with a faint linen texture and no logo. I sealed it slowly, smoothing the flap with my thumb, as though sealing more than just paper. I didn't send it by email. I didn't scan it or text a confirmation. I drove it to the post office in town. The line was short. I placed it on the counter without speaking. The woman behind the counter asked, "Need a tracking number?" I shook my head. Outside, a breeze caught my skirt, just enough to remind me I had nothing in my hands. For a moment, I stood there, palms open, empty. That evening, I placed a sticky note on the fridge with a single-sentence legal paperwork complete. No one else would read it, but I liked the formality of it, the punctuation, the closure. 2 mornings later, I stood in line at the clerk's office. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, and the man ahead of me was arguing about a parking ticket. When it was my turn, I handed over the printed form and ID without speaking. The woman behind the desk skimmed the paper and glanced at the line where my surname had been neatly changed. Just a legal name correction. I nodded. She spoke aloud as required Etta Merritt. It didn't sound new. It sounded returned. She stamped twice. The papers slid across the counter toward me, one copy to keep, one to file. Would you like us to notify Social Security for you? I declined with a half smile. No one behind me in line looked up. No one knew what I had just signed away. Or reclaimed. On my way out, I passed the park where Drew once took a call that lasted through an entire picnic. I passed the boutique where Sloane bought 4 pairs of heels and forgot them at my house. I passed the cafe where Margaret once told me flatly, "You try too hard. It's exhausting to watch." The memory didn't sting. It just passed through. Back at the house, I changed into a soft cotton shirt with frayed cuffs and opened the old sewing box. I hadn't touched it in weeks. A spool of thread sat tilted still, threaded through the last needle I'd used. I chose muslin, plain unbleached, a little stiff at the fold. There was no plan. Just a need to move my hands. I cut uneven strips and began stitching slowly, not with precision, but with rhythm. It was nothing grand, just a pouch, for seeds or dried lavender or nothing at all. It didn't matter. I wasn't making it to be seen. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. Once, then again. A third time, then stillness. I didn't reach for it. I let the vibration fade beneath the table. My hand kept moving. The seam wasn't straight, but it held. Later that night, I finally checked the screen. 3 messages, all from Colleen. Got the doc. Need to confirm it's really you. If you're doing this to make a point, congratulations. Next time, just say it to our face. No hello. No question. No sign anyone had actually read the letter tucked behind the form. I didn't reply. I folded the pouch and set it on the windowsill. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. In the morning, I gathered old bank statements, wedding documents, and the faded printout of our Charleston lease and slid them into a brown folder marked Archive. I didn't shred them. I didn't burn anything. I just folded the flap and placed it inside a box on the top shelf next to a jar of sea glass from Tybee Island and a snow globe that no longer swirled. I opened a drawer and pulled out the ring box I'd left untouched since the day I returned home. I didn't try it on. I just held it in my palm. The metal had cooled, even though the velvet lining still remembered the shape of my hand. I placed the ring beside the pouch. Neither belonged to anyone now. Both were mine. Mid-afternoon, I received an email marked urgent from the Callahan estate's lawyer. Attached was a final confirmation letter already signed by Drew. His name looked rushed. Fewer loops than usual. No note, no copy to me. Just the digital echo of his agreement. I read the letter twice. Nowhere did it say my name. Not once. I didn't print that one. I just closed the screen. I walked outside and sat on the porch where the light touched only half the railing, and the wind carried no voices. In the distance, a neighbor's wind chime rang soft metallic offbeat. Inside, the documents were done. The name was changed. The ring was boxed. And a stitched pouch sat waiting on the windowsill. Some things end not with a bang, but with a form, a thread, and the quiet certainty of choosing not to ask permission. I didn't need anyone to witness this. I just needed it to no longer be reversible. Some things are better when no one's watching. Not because they're secret, just because they're real. I opened the kitchen window with 2 hands slow and even. The wood frame no longer stuck like it used to. The air slipped in without rush, carrying no scent in particular, only stillness. a thin ribbon of dust, hung where the light touched the windowsill, unmoving. I didn't wave it away. I set the kettle down onto the stove already warm from an earlier use. I didn't need much, just enough to fill the clay teapot my mother once wrapped in a linen cloth and placed in the center of her kitchen shelf. There's a faint crack along the spout now. I don't mind. The tea leaves weren't bought. I clipped them weeks ago from the hedge out back and dried them between 2 pages of an old composition notebook. They crumbled gently when I lifted them with a spoon. Not fragrant, not fancy, just enough to remind me of where I've been. While the water heated, I picked up a blank postcard from the stack near the bread box. No image on the front, just soft matte white with a slight tooth to the paper. I wrote a few words in the center without a salutation. You don't need to be understood today. Just don't lose yourself while waiting for them to understand. No signature. No date. I pinned it to the corkboard behind the door, next to a faded shopping list, and a crooked thumbtack that had held nothing for months. I didn't read it again. At the table, I picked up the linen cloth I'd been mending, not from a wedding dress, or a photograph, or an heirloom anyone would recognize. Just a table runner I'd found in the cedar chest last winter, the kind used for Sunday tea, and nothing more. One edge had frayed where time had touched it too many times. I worked the new lace into the old hem with uneven stitches. Grey thread this time, not to hide the tear, but to name it. I stitched while the kettle whistled. Outside, the garden hadn't bloomed. The plum tree stood quiet, bare of blossoms, but upright. I didn't need it to flower. I just needed it to keep standing. When the tea steeped enough to darken the water, I poured it into a cup without a matching saucer. I drank it slowly, holding the warmth with both hands. No one would walk in. No one would ask how I liked it. No one would forget I'd made it. At the edge of the table sat a tiny bundle of invitations, hand-cut, tied with twine. I'd made them for 2 of my students' teenage girls who'd asked if we could have a graduation tea. They called me Miss Merritt now. It rolled off their tongues like it had always been that way. They didn't ask what came before. They didn't need to know. I wrote their names carefully. In pencil. They'd be the only guests. The table would need only 3 chairs. Behind the cabinet glass was a photo I hadn't looked at in months. A side-angled shot from my wedding, taken moments before the procession began. I wasn't facing the camera. I was adjusting the veil alone. The light had landed just right on the ring. No one else was in the frame. I took it down gently, wiped the glass with my sleeve, and opened the back. I slid the photo out and placed it in the wooden box beside the folded pouch and the name change certificate. Then I took the ring from the drawer. Still cool, still small. I didn't try it on. Just set it next to the picture and closed the lid. Not locked, not hidden, just closed. Later that afternoon, a text came from an unknown number. The new Callahan family tree is being printed. Do you want to provide a preferred suffix or name to include? I didn't reply. There were no cruel words, no accusations, just another form, another performance. A tree that had never grown with my name on its branch. I didn't delete the message. I just placed the phone face buttress down. I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote a list of groceries. It was a plain list: bread flour, honey, lavender thread. At the bottom, I added almost as an afterthought, 3 white candles. Not for ceremony. Not for anyone else. Just to light during tea. That evening, I folded the linen cloth once more. The lace edge held its place uneven and visible. I pressed it between 2 books and stacked them gently on the windowsill. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower started. A familiar sound, but not tied to anyone I knew. I let it fade into background noise. No voices called my name. No notifications blinked on the screen. No one reminded me of where I should be. I sat back in the wooden chair, looked down at the chipped teacup, and watched the last few drops cool at the bottom. The clay had cracked near the base, barely noticeable, unless you looked closely. I ran my thumb over the fissure. It didn't cut. It just reminded me that something could break and still be useful. I didn't fix it. I left the cup on the table and turned the postcard on the board slightly so the light hit it better. That was enough.